The Frontier Thesis, a Turner Thesis, is the argument advanced by historian Frederick Jackson Turner in 1893 that American democracy was formed by the American frontier. He stressed the process, a moving frontier line, and the impact it had on pioneers going through the process. He also stressed results, especially that American democracy was the primary result, along with egalitarianism, a lack of interest in high culture, and violence. American democracy was born of no theorist dream. It was not carried in the Susan Constant to Virginia, nor in the Mayflower to Plymouth. It came out of the American forest, and it gained new strength each time it touched a new frontier, said Turner. In the thesis, the American frontier established liberty by releasing Americans from European mindsets and eroding old, dysfunctional customs. The frontier had no need for standing armies, established churches, aristocrats and nobles, nor for landed gentry who controlled most of the land and charged heavy rents. Frontier land was free for the taking. Turner first announced his thesis in a paper entitled The Significance of the Frontier in American History, delivered to the American Historical Association in 1893 in Chicago. He won wide acclaim among historians and intellectuals. Turner elaborated on the theme in his advanced history lectures and in a series of essays published over the next 25 years. Published along with his initial paper as The Frontier in American History, Turner's emphasis on the importance of the frontier in shaping American character influenced the interpretation found in thousands of scholarly histories. By the time Turner died in 1932, 60% of the leading history departments in the U.S. were teaching courses in frontier history along Turnerian lines. Evolution. Turner set up an evolutionary model, using the time dimension of American history, and the geographical space of the land that became the United States. The first settlers who arrived on the East Coast in the 17th century acted and thought like Europeans. They adapted to the new physical, economic and political environment in certain ways. The cumulative effect of these adaptations was Americanization. Successive generations moved further inland, shifting the lines of settlement and wilderness, but preserving the essential tension between the two. European characteristics fell by the wayside and the old country's institutions were increasingly out of place. Every generation moved further west and became more American, more democratic, and more intolerant of hierarchy. They also became more violent, more individualistic, more distrustful of authority, less artistic, less scientific, and more dependent on ad hoc organizations they formed themselves. In broad terms, the further west, the more American their community. Closed frontier. Turner saw the land frontier was ending, since the U.S. Census of 1890 had officially stated that the American frontier had broken up. He sounded an alarming note, speculating as to what this meant for the continued dynamism of American society as the source of America's innovation and democratic ideals was disappearing. Comparative Frontiers. Historians, geographers, and social scientists have studied frontier-like conditions in other countries, with an eye on the Turnerian model. South Africa, Canada, Russia, Brazil, Argentina, and Australia, and even ancient Rome, had long frontiers that were also settled by pioneers. However, these other frontier societies operated in a very difficult political and economic environment that made democracy and individualism much less likely to appear, and it was much more difficult to throw off a powerful royalty, standing armies, established churches, and an aristocracy that owned most of the land. The question is whether the frontiers were powerful enough to overcome conservative central forces based in the metropolis. Each nation had quite different frontier experiences. For example, the Dutch Boers in South Africa were defeated in war by Britain. In Australia, mateship and working together was valued more than individualism was in the United States. Impact and influence. Other historians in the 1890s had begun to explore the meaning of the frontier, such as Theodore Roosevelt, who had a different theory. Roosevelt argued that the battles between the Trans-Appalachian pioneers and the Indians in the winning of the West had forged a new people, the American race. It was the Turner version that became standard. Turner's thesis quickly became popular among intellectuals. It explained why the American people and American government were so different from their European counterparts. It was popular among New Dealers. Franklin Roosevelt and his top aides thought in terms of finding new frontiers. FDR, in celebrating the third anniversary of Social Security in 1938, advised, "There is still today a frontier that remains unconquered, and America unreclaimed. This is the nationwide frontier of insecurity, of human want and fear. This is the frontier, the America, we have set ourselves to reclaim." Historians adopted it, especially in studies of the West but also in other areas, such as the influential work of Alfred D. Chandler, Jr. In business history, many believed that the end of the frontier represented the beginning of a new stage in American life and that the United States must expand overseas. However, others viewed this interpretation as the impetus for a new wave in the history of United States imperialism. William Appleman Williams led the Wisconsin School of Diplomatic Historians by arguing that the Frontier Thesis encouraged American overseas expansion, especially in Asia, during the 20th century. Williams viewed the frontier concept as a tool to promote democracy through both world wars, to endorse spending on foreign aid, and motivate action against totalitarianism. However, Turner's work, in contrast to Roosevelt's work The Winning of the West, places greater emphasis on the development of American republicanism than on territorial conquest. Other historians, who wanted to focus scholarship on minorities, especially Native Americans and Hispanics, started in the 1970s to criticize the Frontier Thesis because it did not attempt to explain the evolution of those groups. Indeed, their approach was to reject the frontier as an important process and to study the West as a region, ignoring the frontier experience east of the Mississippi River. Turner never published a major book on the frontier, for which he did 40 years of research. However, his ideas presented in his graduate seminars at Wisconsin and Harvard influenced many areas of historiography. In the history of religion, for example, Bowles notes that William Warren Sweet at the University of Chicago Divinity School as well as Peter G. Mode argued that churches adapted to the characteristics of the frontier, creating new denominations such as the Mormons, the Church of Christ, the Disciples of Christ, and the Cumberland Presbyterians. The frontier, they argued, shaped uniquely American institutions such as revivals, camp meetings, and itinerant preaching. This view dominated religious historiography for decades. Moose shows that the 1910s to 1940s black filmmaker and novelist Oscar Micheaux incorporated Turner's Frontier Thesis into his work. Micheaux promoted the West as a place where blacks could transcend race and earn economic success through hard work and perseverance. Slatter argues that the widespread popularization of Turner's Frontier Thesis influenced popular histories, motion pictures, and novels, which characterize the West in terms of individualism, frontier violence, and rough justice. Disneyland's Frontierland of the late 20th 20th century reflected the myth of rugged individualism that celebrated what was perceived to be the American heritage. The public has ignored academic historians' anti-Turnerian models, largely because they conflict with and often destroy the icons of Western heritage. However, the work of historians during the 1980s-1990s, some of whom sought to bury Turner's conception of the frontier, and others who sought to spare the concept but with nuance, have done much to place Western myths in context and rescue Western history from them. New frontiers. Subsequent critics, historians, and politicians have suggested that other frontiers, such as scientific innovation, could serve similar functions in American development. Historians have noted that John F. Kennedy in the early 1960s explicitly called upon the ideas of the frontier. At his acceptance speech on July 15, 1960, Kennedy called out to the American people, "I am asking each of you to be new pioneers on that new frontier. My call is to the young in heart, regardless of age, to the stout in spirit, regardless of party." Mayflower notes that he cultivated this resurrection of frontier ideology as a motto of progress throughout his term of office. Quote, "He promoted his political platform as the New Frontier, with a particular emphasis on space exploration and technology." Limerick points out that Kennedy assumed that the campaigns of the Old Frontier had been successful and morally justified. The frontier metaphor thus maintained its rhetorical ties to American social progress. The Frontier Thesis is one of the most influential documents on the American West today. Fermilab, Kolb and Hodgson argue that during the heyday of Kennedy's New Frontier, the physicists who built the Fermilabs explicitly sought to recapture the excitement of the Old Frontier. They argue that frontier imagery motivates Fermilab physicists, and a rhetoric remarkably similar to that of Turner helped them secure support for their research, rejecting the East and West Coast lifestyles that most scientists preferred. They selected a Chicago suburb on the prairie as the location of the lab. A small herd of American bison was started at the lab's founding to symbolize Fermilab's presence on the frontier of physics and its connection to the American prairie. The bison herd still lives on the grounds of Fermilab. Architecturally, the lab's designers rejected the militaristic design of Los Alamos and Brookhaven as well as the academic architecture of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. Instead, Fermilab's planners sought to return to Turnerian themes. They emphasized the values of individualism, empiricism, simplicity, equality, courage, discovery, independence, and naturalism in the service of democratic access, human rights, ecological balance, and the resolution of social, economic, and political issues. Milton Stanley Livingston, the lab's associate director, said in 1968, "The frontier of high energy and the infinitesimally small is a challenge to the mind of man. If we can reach and cross this frontier, our generations will have furnished a significant milestone in human history." Electronic frontier. The Internet and the World Wide Web are often seen as part of a new electronic frontier, with profound implications for the future of communications, the society and the economy. The slogan, "The Internet is free," echoes the "free land" mantra of the Turner Thesis. Indeed, opposition to paywalls and subscription services resembles the pioneer quest for free land unencumbered by ownership claims. Scholars analyzing the Internet have often cited Frederick Jackson Turner's frontier model. Of special concern is the question whether the electronic frontier will replicate the stages of development of the American land frontier. Wikipedia is a major presence on the electronic frontier. and the Wikipedia editors have been explicitly compared to the pioneers of Turner's American frontier in terms of the youth, aggressiveness, boldness, equalitarianism and rejection of limitations.